back to him.
I finally just got in, third time's the charm.
Welcome
Okay,
aboard.
Ed, we're live. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to start the meeting. It is 6:22. Calling to order the Open Space Land Acquisition and Farmland Preservation Committee, Monday, May 18th, 2020 meeting at 6:22 p.m. And we have, to the best of my knowledge, I don't see anything queued up other than I have one letter to read into the record from the public, from public comment. Open Space Land Acquisition and Farmland Preservation Committee, remote meeting, Monday, May 18th, 2020. My name is John Chunis. I live at 40 Deerfield Run in Rocky Hill. I have been a resident of Rocky Hill for 45 years. I wish to provide my comments concerning the status of Streska Farm Development Project. I was at the public hearing on August 19th, 2019, when this project was presented. I recall the town mayor, Mr. Joe Kohanek, state that we, quote, "we have people in town who want to farm this land," close quotes, and that the purchase of the town would be for, quote, "farming and passive recreation for the people of Rocky Hill," close quote. I spoke at that meeting and provided my support for the project. I also heard many comments from both the public and town council members that local farmers would lease plots on the land for farming, and other areas not suitable for farming would be open for passive recreation such as walking trails, bird watching, etc. Now that the town has purchased the property, I am concerned at the slow pace of progress with getting these activities moving forward. One particular concern is that if the property is left idle throughout the coming spring and summer, is that significant overgrowth of wild shrubbery would occur, a natural process. It won't be long before the entire area on the east side of New Road looks like the west side, rendering the property impassable and unusable for both farming and passive recreation. Considerable additional expense would then be required for the town to put this property to use. I did see that the proposed town budget is projected to increase by something like 8.5%. Considering the additional economic impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has placed on both the town and taxpayers, it is paramount that the town reach out to local farmers ASAP to get leases in place to offset any tax increases placed on the residents. If we miss the coming growing season, it is likely that farmers will be unwilling to lease any land that has become overgrown. I urge the committee to move quickly in leasing the land that is currently suitable for farming and develop actions to get the remaining land unsuitable for farming opened up for the desired passive recreation activities. Thank you for allowing me to provide my comments. John Chunis. Having read that into the record, I'm going to move to the presentations that we have prepared, that Ray Carpentino and John Mayer prepared for tonight's meeting. So Streska Farm update presentation. I don't know, Ray, would you like to start this section off?
Ed, we're having a presentation by Kip. He submitted his farm report. He had gone out to the farm to do soils analysis and inspection with Robert Alvarado, our inland wetlands agent and engineering assistant. And as a result of that field trip, Kip presented a report, which you all have. And tonight he is here to present it to you.
Sure. So yeah. So again, I don't know whether if people have specific questions, or I don't know if we can do a shared screen. I do have a couple of PowerPoint presentations. If we want to try to, if we can share my screen, is that possible?
That is possible, Kip,
Right,
if you
is that
know how to
possible?
manage that.
I know, IT has your maps, Kip, you know, your farm plot map and also the other map with the 13 pinpoints
Yep.
on that. So, we can call those up.
Okay, if you want to do it that way, that's fine. Yeah. Because I don't see that I have a, oh, I see on the bottom, I have a shared screen. Oh, wait, okay. That's,
Right.
okay.
That's map, what I'm calling map A. That's the entire site
Yep,
showing section A and section B.
okay.
And then I believe the next map is the pin map that you have, the 13 points. Okay, there
Right.
we go. So I guess starting with the recommendation, you know, generally what you did, and then maybe just go to the recommendations as far as the farming plots and what parts of the farm are best for municipal use as opposed to leasing out for
Sure.
farms.
Yep. Were you going to bring up that, yeah, the
Map B,
13
I think.
one with the 16th? There we are. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. So basically we walked over the entire parcel, and as you know, I'm sure many of you are aware, some of the fields were actively used last year. Some of them, it looked like it had been a couple of years since it's been used. And then there are others where it's, you know, been maybe 3 or 4 years since it's been used. And it has a lot of small fields. And the way some of them are laid out, you know, maybe if you were an individual farmer, it might make sense to farm it that way. And though, if you're looking at to have, you know, I think that I said no more than 4 leases. I think that, you know, it makes it a little more difficult, and depending on the kind of agricultural activities, you know, the small fields can make it more difficult. So certainly one thing that you may have seen as a recommendation is perhaps that in the future of using the restoration program for the Department of Agriculture to take out some hedgerows, take out invasives, do some restoration of some farmland in certain areas. So I had basically, you know, 16 different observations for just various portions of the farm. The one thing that I was not clear on, and maybe Ray could provide, or somebody else, some additional information, I wasn't sure whether or not, where you see points 16 and 17, whether those fields are included in with the Mr. Straska's 1-year lease, or whether those areas also would be available.
Those are within Mr. Straska's 1-year area, section B, we call it.
Okay. So he has use of those areas. So,
Yes.
And then some other points is that, let me try to minimize this screen here. So your largest fields that have the most potential for the, you know, largest variety of agricultural activities is field 7. Back there, we see that point there. It does have some complex slopes, so some slightly sloping areas and some flat areas. But if it's, you know, farmed across slope, it shouldn't be excessive erosion. Some good soils there. And then where there's areas 13, 14, a couple of nice fields there that certainly have a lot of potential. And then let's see, I guess I can't quite see it. Let me look on my map, but you can probably see it. We're at field 11, which is the southernmost field on New Road. That's one of the larger fields as well. that has the most utility. So, and then, you know, in the area that's kind of on the edge of the water course, where I have point 3 and 4 and 2, you know, some of that is quite sloping. There was a small cornfield that it was adjacent to the brook. There's also, because it's you know, a dense till, hard pan landscape, when you get to the lower part of the slope, there's some steep areas. So I think that some of that makes it difficult to farm. So recommendation would be to extend a buffer along the stream and maybe see the steeper part of the slope down to, you know, a hay crop, a hay land. So if you want to go to the next slide, I don't know, Ray, do you have the one that has the A, B, C on it? Yes. So that was looking at, you know, trying to think of what would be reasonable lease areas so that somebody could have, you know, some nice flatter, well-drained cropland, maybe something that's a little sloping that they have to manage a little more carefully, and more or less equal size areas. So that each one of those is about, you know, 10, 12 acres of usable land. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of it was used in the last year or two, in which case it's pretty easy to put back into production. Some of those other areas, they might need, you know, there's some invasives, there's some agricultural weeds. So, you know, over the long term, there would be some investments that need to be used to bring those back into full productivity. And as I said, perhaps, you know, taking out some down trees and some hedgerows and things like that. And then just above where you see point number 2, that field there are ditches on, well, it's right below where B is, where the pin is with B. That field looks like that it had, there's drainage ditches on both sides. Probably those drainage ditches would need to be cleared out so that they work a little bit better, and then that makes that a more useful field as well. And again, there's, I think that I would, you know, agree with whoever wrote the letter there that, you know, it doesn't take long for agricultural weeds and invasives to quickly take over. So, and as those farmers that are on the line know, you know, it's rapidly approaching the time when it's almost past for planting it's time past for planting some things. There are obviously still some things that could be planted. And though, even if areas that may not have a, you know, an annual crop planted, it might make sense for some of those areas to either plant to a cover crop or plant to clover or something like that, just to help restore the soil fertility, help keep the invasives and the agricultural weeds under control. And then if we want to go to, so want me to talk about the recommendations, I can kind of, I don't know if you have those or not, but as far as my list of recommendations, I can quickly read through those if people are interested.
Yes, please.
Okay. So first one is, again, benefits to growing this season, allows management of fields and fertility. The town could certainly apply for the Department of Agriculture's Farmland Restoration Program because it's town-owned land. It's a 90% paid by the state, 10% by the town or the farmer, and obviously in-kind can also be used. This could be used for some of the restoration work that could be done. Again, I think as far as giving people a reasonable amount of farmable land, and also from a management and logistics by whether it's the you folks on the committee or the town holding 3 or 4 leases, because there may be, not everybody has the same kind of farm operation, maybe the same kind of needs for land, of allowing people to sublease or to make arrangements within those 3 or 4 farmers. So if somebody has some sloping land, and they, aren't necessarily interested in, and there is a hay field or two, a hay, that somebody else should be allowed to come in and hay it. That's part of that group. I think certainly would be interested, as people have access to it, of what their ideas might be for which hedgerows make sense to take out because of the size of the equipment. There's just a whole network of different farms roads. I think some consolidation of farm roads would probably be very helpful. Those folks that already have an NRCS conservation plan, they probably would want to add those fields, work with NRCS for designing an overall conservation plan that would include these subsets of the farmers plans, as well as, if you want to do some things with the management of the woodland management plan, and maybe some wildlife habitat. And then, I included those potential lease areas. We didn't really look at the pond area in any detail to see what suitable that would be for irrigation water. Didn't have any information on the current well, the capacity or the quality of the water. So that would be something that need to be addressed. And then also, because there is still some infrastructure on Mr. Staska's 1-year lease of in the future, whether it's worth trying to make use of, obviously there's water and electricity there, make use of any of the old greenhouse infrastructure there, because I think that area where that farmstead was probably makes the most sense location-wise, water and electric for the community garden component, plus, maybe other farm infrastructure to keep it there where you have disturbed soils and not put it on natural, prime farmland soils for any farm infrastructure. So I know we've got some time limits, so I'm certainly interested in your thoughts or any questions or observations that people would have.
So, yeah, so the way we usually do it, Kip, is after a presentation, we make you available to questions from the town councilors sitting on the committee. Okay. So I'll go to Christopher Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Kip. And I'll keep it quick because I know we're trying to wrap up before the next meeting at 7. So can you just provide a little bit more detail about why you think it's a good idea for work to begin this year, and then maybe what's at stake if we're not able to have work done on the site this year, and how much tougher does that make things next year?
Right. So probably the fields that were used last year, your biggest threat would be that there are agricultural weeds that would start to take over. And then, you will have lost some fertility, things like nitrogen and potassium that are water soluble, they tend to leach. The soils become a little bit more acid. So then somebody does farm them, they're going to have to spend more money with lime and fertilizer to bring back the fertility. And then also it's going to be harder to control the agricultural weeds. So they may have to use more herbicides or more tillage practices, which can potentially be loosening the soil and potentially causing erosion or compaction or some of those kinds of things. So that's why I think that it would be, helpful to have it, as much of it be actively farmed this year. And if there are areas that people are uncertain about how they're used, but they're suitable for more intensive agricultural use, either for, row crops or perennial crops or hay or something like that, that either they get seeded down to a legume, because that helps build soil fertility and soil health, or a grass, or a cover crop of some sort, even if it's just, rye. Oh, it's getting a little late for that, of like buckwheat or Sudan grass, or something that's going to be able to crowd out the weeds, because the weed seeds, are going to continue to sprout otherwise, and be a constant source of irritation whoever farms it. And then, as we know, anything that wasn't farmed last year, the invasives were already starting to take over. So there's areas where bittersweet and poison ivy and grapevine and autumn olive and multiflora rose are already starting in some of those areas, and they can put on a lot of growth in 1 year. So again, not that it can't be restored, but you're going to have to, rather than before of being able to plow it or brush hog it to keep it under control, then you're talking about, more intensive mowing or herbicide use to be able to bring it under control and be able to get it suitable for bringing back into production. So, after, if it goes longer than a couple of years, then you're looking at, probably $1,500, $2,000 an acre to try to restore it. So it doesn't take long before it starts to cost more money to get it back into good shape and bring it back into production. So you can pay me now or pay me later.
Thanks.
Yep, sure. John Malero, questions?
A question around the surveying. Is this something that we need to still survey ahead of time before we get anything started? Or has that been done already?
The surveying as relates to
The land itself, the sections.
Well, I wouldn't say, I don't think that as far as surveying to designate areas, I think they're clear enough as far as just sketching them on a map so somebody would know what their lease or permit or area would be. And then there was also some reference, maybe you're talking about in my report, of some additional soil survey work. So that maybe and some sampling, that can certainly still be done now. So when he wants to do with some additional soil sampling out there. So, and I think that it's clear, to everybody of exactly what is within somebody's lease area or permit area, so they know what they're responsible for keeping up or doing some restoration on. And then the only other thing which we didn't really talk about is as far as the recreation, and basically that the wooded area that's the southern part of the parcel, there is an access road, a farm access road that goes all the way up to that. There's that little small field where I had point number 2 when I broke it up into the different parcels, and I have a question mark next to it. That field is quite overgrown. So, that's kind of a high point there. So that actually, it's a small field. It's quite shaded. It's got a lot of invasives. It could be restored back for somebody to use. It also could be kind of a good terminus if you did want it to do some sort of a passive recreation trail that would make use of that existing farm road through the wooded area. It takes you through a couple of different kinds of nice habitat. So, in general, I think that it's not that it can't work to have walking trails and public access around the edge of the active agricultural fields, but I think it can make it more challenging because people have the tendency to wander off the trail and get into the field or help themselves to agricultural crops and things like that. So certainly I think the wooded area and using the existing farm road and maybe a portion of that small field makes the most sense for passive recreation use of the property. as well as we talked about in the corner, after Mr. Straska is done with his portion of the 1-year lease, of having the community garden and, you know, maybe some other ag infrastructure up there in the corner with 160 and New Road, and, you know, there'd be some opportunities for some additional public access there.
John, any other questions?
There was something you mentioned during the presentation that there were some items that we may not be able to plant because of just timing of events. And there's other things, obviously, you mentioned that we can. Just so that I have a better sense, maybe we can use percentages. If we were to take these parcels percentage-wise, what can be planted versus that cannot be planted? If you were to just use percentage-wise.
Yeah, I would say what it would be that if somebody wanted to seed something down to a hay crop right now, typically it makes it much more difficult after kind of mid-May to be able to get a good seeding of grasses. So you probably have to wait till the fall. So if there was an additional area that we wanted to seed down to grasses for hay production, it's unless we have some more cool wet weather, in which case maybe you get a good seeding. Otherwise, we typically would say, after mid-May, end of May, you might as well wait until late August before you try to do a seeding for a hay field. So something like that. And then, depending on what the individual farmers, what their production plan and what their business plan is, if somebody wanted to do some early season cool vegetable crops, it's getting a little late for that. But as far as the warmer season crops, like obviously, tomatoes and peppers and squash and pumpkins, it's certainly not too late for that. So part of it just depends on the farmers that are going to be using it. What is it that they typically are growing or would want to grow, and is that going to match, their ability to get on the property?
And you mentioned that's more of a end of May or mid-May, I think you said. I just want to be clear.
Well, if specifically if you were trying to get a sloping area, or you wanted to increase hay fields on the property, that it's very difficult to establish grass for a hay field after about May 15th. So it's just the weeds overtake it, and you don't get good germination of cool season grasses. So in which case we would suggest that you wait till fall before you do that. So, but there's only a couple of areas there where I think that, you'd be looking to try to seed down a hay field. So again, I think the main thing is that, right now we're in the heart of the planting season. So I'm sure people would be anxious if they're going to use the property this year and being able to get some economic activity and a crop off of it, that, they need to have that commitment as soon as possible. And again, I think from a leasing standpoint, or a permit or a license, which basically is a little less complicated than a lease, that you can certainly start off with a 1 year or a 1 to 3 year, and then if everything's going well, move to a longer term lease or a rolling lease. And again, I think that as you develop a plan for the parcel, that it would make sense to talk about making an investment in improving farm access roads, irrigation sources, maybe fencing. I would imagine there's going to be quite a bit of deer pressure on the property, which could be a limitation for its use in some of the areas. So, and there are some matching state and federal dollars for either the farmer and or the town to make those investments.
John, I
And
want to
technical expertise.
let
Thank you, Kip.
the other committee members get a question in. So
Please.
I'm going to turn to Sandy Kelly for one and Brian Clemens for one.
Hey,
Sandy?
thank you, Ed. Kip, I have a question. You talked about the change in the soil, the change in, the equivalent of pH, things I'm not technically familiar with. But also of interest was potential erosion. I mean, the invasives, the overgrowth and erosion. If we don't get a 1-year lease in place this year, and that land is unused for a year, and there are physical changes just due to nature, et cetera, are we, in the town and the farmers, facing almost a new set of determination of land usage? They've got their parcels now, it's all well laid out, they've worked beautifully together. But if there's erosion or if there are changes in the soils and they have to relook at everything they wanted to plant or what their lots were, this is going to fall also on the town to then sit down and reassign land. Is this an exaggeration, or when land changes happen naturally, is this something we might face?
Well, I would say, there are a few of the fields that were bare, that didn't have cover crops on them. So, one, they could potentially fill in with annual weeds, in which case you've got a huge weed bank, or it is possible that, because we are getting more intensive rain events, the fact that they don't have much vegetative cover, that you could end up with more erosion, in which case, it may cost more to try to restore those areas. So you could, have some more additional degradation of soil health with some erosion on some of those areas, because they didn't have a cover crop and because they're not going to be cropped this year. But I would say the main issue is that you're going to lose some fertility, and that you're going to compound the problem of agricultural weeds and invasives, which means it's going to cost somebody more and harder to put into production.
In the essence of time, I'm going to try to get Brian Clemens a question. He's a member of the committee, standing committee.
Oh, thank you.
We have a hard stop because we have a council meeting with budget ramifications. So we are at 6:55 right now. We have to give several minutes for the technical staff to restart up the other meetings. So Brian, go ahead with your question.
Just real quick, Kip, your recommendation would be for multi-year lease and to have it start now so they can start working the land? Or, I don't think they can't plant this year, could they?
They can, depending, as I said, on one of the questions, depending on what their business plan is and their production plan and the money that they have, because obviously, seedlings and plants and seed and fertilizer cost money. It's certainly not too late for somebody to be planting some crops there. It just depends on what it is that they grow. Is the timing going to work out? And some of those fields need more labor and time than others because they haven't been put into production, or because there are a lot of agricultural weeds. So, in most cases, farmers don't have a lot of help, and there's not enough hours in the day. So, whether or not they'll be able to fit it into their business plan at this point in time, or maybe they've been planning to be able to use it. I don't know. That would be a good question for them.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
So Kip, I'm thinking more along the lines of the farmers might be able to get on, but certainly this year, but do the preparation work so that they can have a full season next year, no?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, right, so that would be the advantage of, obviously doing a 1 year or 2 years would be the easiest. So, and then to convert it to something longer, amend a lease or go from a license or a permit, which is 1 year, and then make a determination.
We've not been presented with a license exhibit, and we have a rather minor draft of a lease that hasn't been through our attorney. So what I'm thinking is that we want to try to help the farmers all we can, but this is really allowing them to position. This is a year of positioning the fields, not growing them, cleaning them up, and they probably will be able to get in there and fit it into their schedules by working it. I don't know, like you said, there's going to be some other, maybe somebody comes up with a crop that's a fall planting crop, but anyway, thank you very much for your presentation. We are at our hard stop, Kip. Unfortunately, it's and we have the council that must start. So we would probably like to have you back to the committee at a future date.
That'd be fine, and certainly willing to have a conversation with any of the farmers or town staff or committee members as well.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks for the
Good night.
invitation. Okay, good night.